The ventilator alarm screamed as little Emma's oxygen levels plummeted. "The machine's malfunctioned," Dr. Johnson said helplessly, his hands shaking as he tried to manually bag the 6-year-old. "We need to transfer her to another hospital." But Sarah, the night shift nurse who'd been fetching coffee for residents all evening, was already MacGyvering a field ventilator from IV tubing and oxygen tanks. "This will work," she said matter-of-factly. "I kept soldiers breathing with less. Because sometimes the person with the most life-saving experience is the one everyone treats like furniture. Welcome to Silent Warriors. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Keep watching to uncover this mystery." Sarah Chen was 31 years old, 5 feet 5 inches tall, with black hair always pulled back in a bun, quiet and efficient in her work as a night nurse. She'd been working at St. Mary's Hospital for 2 years and was considered invisible by almost everyone. The night shift was tough work. Few staff, many cases, doctors usually inexperienced residents. Sarah's job was simple: distribute medications, keep records, fetch whatever the doctors needed, quietly, without complaint, unnoticed. Dr. Johnson, a second-year resident, saw her as someone who served coffee. He would ask Sarah to get fresh coffee when the operating room ran out. Nurse Williams gave her extra cleaning duties because there's less work on the night shift. Chief Dr. Peterson never noticed her, as if she wasn't there. Sarah was used to this. For 2 years, the same routine. Quietly, do your job, don't conflict with anyone, don't draw attention, don't talk about the past. Because Sarah had a past, one that nobody knew, nobody could guess. The evening shift started at 7 p.m. Sarah always arrived 10 minutes early, took handover from the day nurses, and waited until the hospital quieted down. The night hospital was a different place, calmer but also more dangerous, because there were very few people to call for help in emergencies. Tonight, Dr. Johnson seemed particularly irritated. He had requested his 3rd coffee, and Sarah had dropped some files while bringing it. Dr. Johnson told Sarah to be more careful, saying the patient files were very important. Sarah apologized and gathered the files. When opening one of them, her eyes caught the file of Emma Rodriguez in pediatric intensive care. 6 years old, traffic accident, multiple trauma, mechanical ventilation support. Sarah calmly told Dr. Johnson that Emma's oxygen saturation seemed to be dropping. Johnson didn't even look at the file and said Sarah was a nurse. That diagnosis wasn't her job, that she should check the monitor and call a technician if necessary. When Sarah tried to mention there was a problem with the ventilator settings, Johnson raised his voice. He explained that Sarah distributed medications, kept records, brought coffee, and should leave medical decisions to him. Sarah nodded and stepped back, but her eyes remained on Emma's monitors. Something was going wrong. Nurse Williams approached, saying room 304 needed to be cleaned because a new patient was coming. When Sarah tried to mention Emma's condition, Williams said her job wasn't patient care, but support services, and she needed to clean the room. Sarah knew that Nurse Williams had seen her this way for 2 years. Not a real nurse, just support staff. Yet Sarah had a nursing license. In fact, she had much more, but nobody knew that. Dr. Peterson passed by in the corridor, saw Sarah, and without even knowing her name, told her to get Emma Rodriguez's file from the operating room. He didn't even know her name despite working in the same hospital for 2 years. Sarah quietly went to the operating room. While getting the file, she encountered technician Tony. Tony asked Sarah if she knew how ventilators worked, saying one seemed to have a problem. Sarah asked what problem. Tony said the one in pediatrics had strange pressure settings, asking if Sarah understood these things. Sarah paused for a moment. She didn't know how to answer this question, because what she knew about ventilators was much more than a normal nurse should know. At 2:47 a.m., an alarm sounded from Emma's room, high-pitched, continuous, indicating an emergency. Sarah ran to the room. Emma's ventilator was flashing red lights, displaying system error. The little girl's oxygen saturation had dropped to 78%. It should normally be above 95%. Dr. Johnson came running, his eyes panicked, asking what was happening. Sarah said the ventilator had malfunctioned and manual ventilation was needed. Dr. Johnson took the ambu bag with trembling hands and placed it on Emma's face, but his hands were shaking so much he couldn't provide effective ventilation. He muttered that this wasn't working, that oxygen levels continued to drop. Nurse Williams came and asked if they could find another ventilator. Dr. Johnson explained there was no pediatric ventilator available. The nearest was on the 5th floor, but it was too risky to transport Emma. Nurse Williams suggested calling the transfer team, that they might have to transport to another hospital. Emma's saturation dropped to 72%. She was at critical level. Sarah stood in the corner, watching the situation. She could see Dr. Johnson was panicking, Nurse Williams didn't know what to do, and Emma was dying. She remembered every moment she had stayed silent for 2 years, every moment she hadn't told anyone who she was for 2 years. But now a 6-year-old girl was dying, and she was the only one who could help. Sarah calmly called to Dr. Johnson. Johnson said this wasn't the time, told her to call the transfer team. Sarah said she could do it. Johnson turned to her and said Sarah was the coffee-fetching nurse, that she didn't understand the seriousness of this situation. Sarah said she could make a ventilator with the materials currently available. Everyone looked at her. Nurse Williams asked what she was saying. Sarah said she could make a manual ventilator with IV tubing, oxygen tank, pressure regulator, temporarily, but it would keep Emma alive. Dr. Johnson laughed, but it was a tense laugh. He told Sarah this wasn't medical school, that human life was at stake. Sarah said she knew, and for the first time, there was something different in her voice. Authority. She said that's why she was doing it. Sarah began moving decisively. She took 4 sets from the supply cabinet in the corner, went to the oxygen tanks, checked the pressure regulators. Nurse Williams asked what she was doing. Sarah didn't answer. She was connecting IV tubing together, adjusting the feed from the oxygen tank, setting up a manually controlled pressure system. Dr. Johnson was still trying to manually ventilate Emma, but failing. He said this wasn't working and asked how long the transfer team would take. Nurse Williams said at least 20 minutes. Dr. Johnson said they would lose Emma by then. Sarah had finished the improvised ventilator. It looked simple, but was functional. A temporary but effective system that controlled the pressure of air coming from the oxygen tank, manually adjustable. Sarah said it was ready. Dr. Johnson looked at her and asked what this was. Sarah explained it was a temporary ventilator that would provide sufficient oxygen to Emma's lungs. Dr. Johnson asked if it was safe. Sarah looked into Dr. Johnson's eyes and said she'd kept soldiers alive with less. The room fell silent. Nurse Williams raised her head and asked what she had said. Sarah explained that in Afghanistan, on her 3rd tour, she had ventilated wounded soldiers with simpler equipment under worse conditions. Dr. Johnson looked at Sarah with different eyes and asked how this was possible. Sarah said she was an Army medic, had served 6 years, worked in field hospitals, forward bases, during evacuations, doing whatever was necessary. Emma's saturation had dropped to 68%. There was no more time to talk. Sarah connected the improvised ventilator to Emma. She made careful adjustments, controlled the pressure, regulated the airflow. And it worked. Emma's chest was rising and falling regularly, oxygen saturation slowly increasing. 72%, 75%, 78%. Dr. Johnson whispered how this was possible. Sarah explained that sometimes the most advanced technology is found in hands that understand basic principles, and because she had been forced to do this before. Nurse Williams continued looking at Sarah and asked if she had been an Army medic. Sarah said yes, that she was 91W, healthcare specialist, had done 3 tours in Afghanistan. Williams asked why she hadn't said so. Sarah, while checking Emma's monitors, explained that she wanted to be just a night nurse here, didn't want to deal with the past. Dr. Johnson was still in shock and asked how she learned this level of medical intervention. Sarah said when you work at forward operating bases, you learn improvisation. Equipment isn't always available, but patients always are. Dr. Johnson wanted to know what types of cases she encountered. Sarah paused for a moment and described shrapnel wounds, burns, multiple trauma, IED explosions. When there was no ventilator, no ambu bag, no electricity, you save lives with whatever materials you have. Nurse Williams lowered her voice and asked if that's why she was always so calm, never panicked in emergencies. Sarah explained that in field medicine, if you panic, people die. You learn to stay calm. Dr. Johnson examined the system Sarah had built and said it was truly professional level, requiring engineering knowledge. Sarah explained it was part of Army medic training, medical engineering, field improvisation, emergency technology. 6 months of training, then application in real situations. Dr. Johnson asked why she worked here, that she could find a job anywhere she wanted. Sarah's face hardened slightly, and she said sometimes after returning from war, "You want to be simple, don't want to explain to anyone who you are." Emma's saturation had risen to 88%. She looked stable. Dr. Johnson asked if this system would work until the transfer team arrived. Sarah said it would work, but they needed to monitor constantly. They were adjusting pressure manually. Dr. Johnson asked if he could do it, if she could teach him. Sarah smiled for the first time and said, of course. When the transfer team arrived, Emma was stable, the improvised ventilator working perfectly. The paramedics were surprised when they saw the system. The lead paramedic asked who had done this. Dr. Johnson pointed to Sarah and said Nurse Sarah was an Army medic. The paramedic looked at Sarah respectfully and asked if she had been a soldier. Sarah said she was an Army healthcare specialist, had done 3 tours in Afghanistan. The paramedic expressed respect and said the workmanship was excellent. After Emma was safely transported to the higher-level hospital, there was a strange silence in the hospital corridor. Dr. Johnson approached Sarah and said he was sorry, that he realized he had never really known her. Sarah said the apology was unnecessary, that he couldn't have been expected to know her background. Dr. Johnson explained that his behavior, seeing her as someone who just brought coffee, was unacceptable. Sarah shrugged and said she wanted to appear that way. It was easier. Nurse Williams also came and apologized. She said seeing Sarah as support staff wasn't fair at all. Sarah said Williams couldn't have known who she was either. Williams explained that she should have shown respect regardless of experience. Dr. Peterson came to get the night shift report and learned about the situation. He looked at Sarah with different eyes. Dr. Peterson addressed her as Nurse Chen, using her name for the first time, and said he heard about the work she did tonight. Sarah said she just did her job. Peterson said no, she did much more than her job, and this hospital was very lucky to have her working here. Sarah thanked him. Peterson said he had a question. Why she had hidden these experiences, that she could work in the trauma team, could teach emergency medicine. Sarah looked out the window and said, "Sometimes you want to be quiet. Sometimes bringing coffee is easier than saving lives." Dr. Peterson understood and asked if it was PTSD. Sarah said it was under control, but sometimes being simple was better. The next night shift, Sarah came again. But this time it was different. She was no longer invisible. Dr. Johnson approached her and said he had a case he wanted to consult about. Sarah said of course. Johnson asked if he could ask questions about her Army medic experiences that he wanted to learn. Sarah said he could ask. Nurse Williams brought coffee to Sarah. She said this time Sarah should sit, she would bring it. Sarah smiled and told Williams that bringing coffee wasn't a problem. Williams said she was no longer just someone who brought coffee, never had been. Dr. Peterson mentioned Sarah's name in the morning report for the first time. He explained that thanks to Nurse Sarah Chen's excellent performance on the night shift, they had saved a life. Sarah still did the same job, night shift, patient care, record keeping. But now she was treated differently, with respect, as a colleague with experience. Most importantly, little Emma Rodriguez had fully recovered. Her family had come to thank Sarah. Emma's mother had thanked her for saving her daughter. Sarah had said she just used the materials she had. The mother said no, Sarah had saved Emma with her love. That night, going home, Sarah thought, for 2 years she had tried to be invisible, because after returning from war, she wanted to be simple. But sometimes, even the simplest job was saving lives. And sometimes, hiding your past ensures you don't miss the moment when you need to use it. Subscribe to Silent Warriors to continue with Hidden Heroes stories.